Without any more waiting, we have Brody Nisbet here. He's going to be speaking about find, fix, finish, generating competitive advantage with threat hunting. So big round of applause for Brody.
All right, how's the sound? Excellent, thank you. All right, hello, my name is Brody Nisbet, and I would like to thank the organisers of B-Sides for allowing me to be up here today. It's a privilege. I've been coming for many years, and this is my first public appearance. So this is my presentation. Find, fix, finish on generating competitive advantage with threat hunting. And as some of you might know, I work at CrowdStrike, if you can't tell from the media. And I've been there for almost 11 years. So I started out at CrowdStrike as an intrusion analyst, and today I am the director of Overwatch. I'm responsible for leading our global team of threat hunters across the various missions we have. So we divide up our threat hunting based on mission, and the purpose for this sort of thing is something I'll talk about a bit later. But we have espionage, e-crime, insider threats, counterintelligence, and private sector offensive. What else about me? So there's only two more things I'd like you to know, and that is I have two professional pet peeves. One of them is revealing tradecraft in public, and the other one is public speaking. So I'm crossing both of my red lines today. And today I'm going to talk about two concepts central to the way I think about threat hunting. First is a simple workflow that we use, and the second is the concept of competitive advantage. Now, I don't mean against other vendors, that's a problem for the business, but I actually mean against our customers' adversaries, where we're expected to bring effects against their adversaries year in, year out. We've got a lot of customers who have a lot of problems that don't go away. And I want to talk about these concepts because I think a successful and effective threat hunting program starts well above the technical details that we usually focus on. And I think our simple approach is worth sharing, even if it's a bit mundane and it's probably a bit esoteric to where I've been working for so long, but I'm hoping there's takeaways for anybody that's on the blue team. And last thing before I go on is I do apologize, but after July 19, there's no jokes or memes in this slide deck. So let's tackle the term threat hunting first. In my experience, most discussions about threat hunting quickly narrow down to a very low tactical individual level, where it becomes about tasks. Tasks like hypothesis-based searching or looking for IOAs or IOCs, writing detections, or even the sort of work that you would find during an incident response or remediation. And I think that's because of the way threat hunting as a term has got as many definitions as there are practitioners and businesses, and for some people it's a part of a job. Some people say that they're threat hunters, but they're actually doing DFIR. It's a bit of a mess. But because of that, I find there's rarely an informed public discussion that goes beyond that low level. And without that sort of abstract thinking, it's kind of hard to set up direction and determine purpose for a threat hunting team. So let me say first and foremost that I view it as an operational art. I've picked that word specifically because with this view, threat hunting, the way we look at it, is the combined effort of the many organised to harness and multiply individual task level activities such that they smoothly achieve a much larger strategic security outcome. Right? So for me specifically, we've arranged our threat hunting workflows in such a way that the primary output of that is actionable threat intelligence. So if I'd asked most of you before I started talking right now, I said, what is threat hunting? You would have said something like it's to detect something and then remediate it, it's to find things, to write detections or whatever. I actually view it as the set of tasks that are needed to produce actionable threat intelligence on the data that's needed. So that intelligence output becomes a critical input necessary to achieve our strategic goals. And that is, like I said earlier, to maintain that competitive advantage against our adversaries. So let's look what I mean. Let's talk about competition in this very specific context. So When somebody attempts to carry out their mission objectives on your network, what ensues is a contest for control of that network. It's probably not cyber war, and it's definitely not chess. And too often you'll hear or read unhelpful metaphors that make comparisons to these things, as if the real-world relationship between an aggressor and the blue team is some sort of rules-based symmetric game. I can assure you it is not, and it is not contained neatly by scopes of work either. Similarly, one might compare hacking to a battlefield and call it a cyber war, and try and understand it through a lens best suited for kinetic effects in geopolitics. Now, while I am actually going to introduce a workflow from the intelligence community later, I've found it far more constructive to understand the relationship between a threat-hunting blue team and an aggressor, a real-world aggressor, as a competition. And that competition has three primary drivers. The first driver is capability, which is really nothing new under the sun. So I'm talking about the people, the processes, and the tools. I mean the operators on both sides. So that, for this dot point, I mean their technical skill sets and capabilities. The procedures that those operators have to follow, because they have workflows and playbooks as well, and constraints, and the software and hardware available to them. Next up is the intelligence contest, or you could also phrase this as just knowledge as well. It doesn't have to be intelligence. And within this, we have terrain, so that's the where, and that's the contested network in all its detail. Actually knowing about a network that you're defending might sound obvious, but they're getting very, very complicated and complex. And certain vendors are now talking about cross-domain threat hunting, which is necessitated by adversaries being able to move very smoothly across boundaries that we would draw in organizational responsibility, like endpoint identity, cloud, that sort of thing. And they don't care about that. They'll just go wherever they can, and you've got to follow them. So the next is actions or activity, and this is the what, when, and how, and it's what your opponent's actually doing. And profile, which is the who and the why. And this is not strictly the same thing as the people and their technical capability. Motive and capability are not the same thing. The final one, and equally important, and I'm glad we've just had Chompy's talk on exploit development life cycles and cost-benefit assessments, but we also need to consider the cost to achieve a goal and the return on investment. So for me, this is the gradient between the cost to detect something versus the cost to compromise relative to the spending capacity of each party. There are edge cases, of course, but as we've just seen, nearly all hacking is subject to the demands of money eventually. And so that means you can raise the cost on your opponent. So every part of the criminal ecosystem needs a return on investment to justify the risks they're taking. Government collection programs need to justify results with collection for their customers. Private sector offensive actors have yachts to buy, and regular commercial red teams, as we've just seen, it's expensive to develop these exploits, and actually can't pay many bills with hacker mentality alone. So in the long run, resourcing matters. So how does any of that affect our operational design? Well, if threat hunting is going to be effective, truly effective against an adversary, well then the output of that needs to address those competitive elements. And so if you remember that I said the purpose is to generate actionable intelligence, well, this is what we need to be writing about to make a difference. These are the drivers and the elements that we want to tip in our favor. We want to tell defenders about the processes and tools being used by an adversary. We want to tell them where in the contested network the intrusion's taking place, where it's going, how fast it's moving, and what it looks like, of course. And if we know about the adversary, we want to share that profile information too. And we want to do this, or we need to do this actually, in such a way that the all-in cost to disrupt an intrusion gets lower the more often we do it. And on the flip side, as we detect and degrade offensive capabilities and share intelligence with partners and customers and competitors sometimes, then we want to widen the gap between the cost to compromise the network and the cost to defend it. The purpose of threat hunting really has to be much more than to detect intrusions and remediate them, which is the definition you will find on most websites for security companies. The real purpose is to change this very equation in our favor. And this is how we're doing it. And I think it's worth sharing because I think it can be emulated by much smaller shops as well. The F3EA loop. Find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze. This is a target acquisition loop. I've borrowed it directly from military doctrine, with one exception. I've not modified it from its source material because it fit our problem just fine, and I had no intention of reinventing it as a cyber thing or something that I came up with. If you're familiar with the framework, as some of you might well be, or you Google the term later, you may realize that the 6th stage, disseminate, is missing. It's not a mistake. In our case, doctrines made room for operational reality from day one. I've omitted dissemination of finished intelligence product because in our specific implementation, that responsibility falls directly across an organizational boundary with our intelligence team. However, we've not ignored that, and threat intelligence and threat hunting really are very closely aligned. In my mind, they're more closely aligned than threat hunting and SOC work. So for us, the flow of data, information, intelligence, and requirements back and forth between a CTI and a threat hunting team really should be considered one of the more important data flows in an organization. Now, what really helps F3EA fit a threat hunting use case is that the workflow is as much about target acquisition and rapidly actioning new findings as it is about carrying out a response. And so even in its original text, it makes great allowance for a range of non-kinetic effects and outcomes. So it's a targeting methodology purposely designed to identify, track, and engage a target among an otherwise civilian environment. And in that sense, I realized, if you think about it, it's kind of ideal for the task of identifying an adversary that starts off their day with privileged or employee-level access to a network. And that's actually the point at which our threat hunting team, and I think threat hunting in general, really came into play, as looking for the hands-on keyboard, right? The backstopping of security products. And it's one of our original missions to be part of a defensive strategy, and F3EA suits that. This distinction also differentiates it nicely from other threat hunting definitions, where the stated purpose is usually a fairly straightforward to detect this thing and then to remediate it. F3EA is a bit different because it places significant emphasis actually on the last 2 stages, which is to exploit and analyze. These are the stages that really provide insight into an adversary and allow for the efficient collection and processing of findings that start the targeting cycle all over again elsewhere and to help you learn about who you're actually trying to stop. It's also how you get out of playing repetitive games of whack-a-mole against an adversary that's well-resourced and has a day job to be where you're trying to protect. You will find that one might find it very difficult to sustain any long-term advantage over that sort of adversary by simply responding to them time and again without learning or improving anything. So let's start with find. If you've got a threat hunting effort or you want to start one, I'm sorry, but you need to start with mission priorities. You need to establish a clear and purposeful mission for your hunters. And it can't be the same as the SOC. If you've got a security operations center, you need to delineate between the two because they need to be doing different things. Without this, without clear purpose and guidance, your hunters are going to find it very difficult to exercise any sort of disciplined initiative in their day-to-day work. And that's going to be crucial if you expect them to react quickly and effectively to intrusions that are unfolding in real time. Next up, if you want to hunt for specific people, groups or organizations or whatever else you've purposely assigned to them, then you need timely, accurate, and relevant threat intelligence about those targets. Questions like who are they and what do they want are far more than idle philosophy. Having the answers can be crucial to understanding the next part, like, well, if they're already on my network, where would they be? What would they look like? When would they operate? When would they be active? Actionable means timely, accurate, and relevant. And you need the threat intelligence to drive a threat hunting mission. After that, we get to probably more comfortable ground, which is the detections engineering side of things. And for today, I just want to call it I'll break it into two groups of detections, one of them being high fidelity and the other being building block. So high fidelity detections are the ones you probably always want to find an answer for, and there should be fewer of these. Building block are the type of detections that are allowed to be noisy, weak, or experimental, so that you can layer them up on one another to find new things. And you need to combine those two to create an effective hunting and monitoring program. Whatever you call those, though, in your own environment, it helps you to build on the next part, which is establishing patterns and baselines so that you can then go on to identify anomalies. Context is one of the most important tools in a threat hunter's arsenal, and it is almost always overlooked whenever I'm reading about guidelines on how to do threat hunting. Context really is everything. And to give you an example of that, there are things that products cannot prevent, obviously, like who am I with an unexpected ancestor or specific flags on a 7-zip command line. Perfectly benign things that happen in large environments probably shouldn't happen in the environment of a think tank that doesn't have a very large cadre of software engineers. So understanding context is super important. All of those things go into generating a hunting lead for your team. And a good lead helps us transition smoothly to the next phase, which is fix. Now in this context, I obviously don't mean to repair anything. It means to locate, identify, and verify what you're looking at as being valid for follow-on actions. Here you want threat hunters to confirm and identify what they've found. Okay, the systems that you create for your threat hunters, the ecosystem that they're working in, really should allow them to take those observations and compare them against known indicators, behaviors, tools, and infrastructure, and to scope out the entire landscape you're defending to see where else it is. First you find something, then you need to figure out if it's a problem or not. And if it's a problem, you need to figure out where it is. This is the scoping process. Now, how long this takes is highly subjective, but ideally, you want it to take minutes. Hours is okay too. Days and weeks is far too long. Far too long. If you want to be competitive on the day, it's got to be minutes to hours. So once you find something, you reach some sort of confirmation and have it scoped and situated. The next is the finish stage, which is kind of odd because it's not actually the finish at all. What it means for us is, well, as threat hunters, the effects we can bring are actually limited. And we're not the DFIR team. If your threat hunters are doing DFIR, probably not doing as much threat hunting as they could be. So the effects we can bring are kind of limited. In this arrangement, what we want to do is provide a very early assessment for the team tasked with remediation. Enough information to get them moving very quickly in their job. And in parallel to this, we want to be preparing the entirety of what we know into actionable intelligence for later. That is a longer, more detailed knowledge transfer that balances timeliness and relevance. And we want to do this without ever forgetting that the immediate goal, the goal on the day, is it's not to show the responders how smart we are and all the cool things we've found, but to help them carry out their remediation. Detailed information that arrives too late is absolutely worthless. And so spending a lot of time writing up, spending 4 hours writing up a brilliant report about something that ended 3 hours ago and is now too late, no good. So the nuance here starts to get very specific very quickly according to where and how you're actually implementing this and what the mission for this threat hunting team actually is. Let's just say, in my world at least, that the goal of find, fix, finish, the first three stages here, is to put that actionable intelligence in the hands of responders. This also actually brings us to the end of the average threat hunting definition. I looked at like 7 or 8 from various vendors, and they all sort of ended around here. They all had many pages on sort of getting from the finding to the remediating. But what comes next is how you actually generate and sustain advantage over a persistent adversary. The next phase is exploit. So that's to identify and capture important information relative to your adversary and your mission. And of course, we've already done a lot of this during the transition from the find to the fix phase. Like, a lot of stuff gets written down. Part of the point of this stage is to capture it properly. And we want to do that now because we want to triage these findings for consumers other than our SOC or DFIR team. We want to take that data, information and intelligence, and sort, store and share it where it needs to go. So I'm talking about getting this information to your CTI team, to your detection engineers, the security operations center, as I said. And maybe even depending on the nature of the threat and what's going on, it needs to go to the security and IT departments, and of course management and leadership probably want to hear about it at some point too. There are a lot of stakeholders for threat intelligence and the output of threat hunting. So if threat hunting sits in a privileged niche in your security organization, then the capture, sorting, storing, and sharing of these findings needs to be as seamless as possible. And that's what actually makes this an important workflow. It's all very well and good to say, oh yeah, we've got to share it. But you all have lived experience of how difficult sharing information actually is. Sometimes sitting down, and for us it's Jira, no one can get away from Jira, but it's about making sure those people know where to go to get that information the minute it's available, right? There's no Slack or email. Write them a letter to let them know. The workflows we have that you follow, that your threat hunters are following, you want them to seamlessly transition that knowledge to where it needs to go in the business. You might have just realized though that proper case exploitation is just a fancy word for doing your documentation properly. And that's all it is, document. This also sets the groundwork for the last part of this loop, which is also the slowest, which is analysis. I don't want to dwell on what analysis means because it's going to be extremely different in every organization, but the things I'd consider is that defensive R&D needs to focus on understanding your adversary, improving your detections and tooling, working on those workflows, building up context for your defenders to better understand what's going on, broadening or deepening your visibility, making sure you've got a good handle on your tech stack and the data that you're expected to hunt across. So research and analysis is obviously the slow part. It can take, so up until now, find, fix, finish, that's sort of the first few hours. Exploitation should happen very shortly after that. But this stage can take days or weeks, or if you're trying to change organizational workflows, it can take months of meetings. And so together with find, we also see that this targeting lifecycle can travel at different speeds. So as it might take a long time to analyze the outcomes of an incident after the fact, it could also take a long time to find something. So this doesn't move at a constant tempo, it's constantly shifting. And the other thing I'll point out at this point is that while data and information about an intrusion and the work of threat hunters will at least flow in that direction, in practice, actually, a lot of the nodes connect to each other as well. Often during the fix phase, you'll find a new intrusion somewhere else. Right? That starts off another loop. During the exploitation phase, when you're sharing data, someone might come back to you and go, oh, well, it's actually over here as well. Start a whole new loop again. Okay, and sometimes it goes backwards, in very rare cases. So that's actually it, really. A 40-year-old counter-terrorism, counter-insurgency targeting cycle applied for about 4 or 5 years now in practice to a defensive cybersecurity use case. In summary, what are we doing? The F3EA Loop is an effective way to arrange otherwise fairly disparate threat hunting activity. You can use it to address imbalances in the competitive drivers of network control, namely the capability, knowledge, and resourcing. And when you apply this over the long term and at scale, that's when you start to learn about your adversaries and simultaneously start to lower the cost of detecting them while raising the cost of compromising your network. So in this way, threat hunting helps us generate a sustainable competitive advantage that you can use to maintain control of your networks over the long term. And that's it. Thank you.